How's it going? I'm gonna do a quick video on how to wire up a Toyota e-locker using the factory ECU and switch. This truck right here is running, it's got an e-locker in the front. I built this thing, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago for my son, and he's been running it. When I built it, I had the ECUs and the switches and everything, but I couldn't find a diagram that told me how to wire them up. But there's a bunch of diagrams on using relays. So that's the route I went. I used that's an on-off-on switch with a light that comes on when the locker is fully engaged. Works fine. The only problem is that with this kind of setup, when you run this thing, when you try to lock it, and that light doesn't come on because the splines, your splines and your diff aren't lined up, the actuator motor has already run the shifting fork all the way over to lock. So once you move and those splines line up, it's spring loaded inside the actuator. It'll kick that shifting fork the rest of the way over. But my son, who's 8, he runs this truck, and when he's got both cases in low and in 4-wheel drive, he gets himself all bound up in the rocks, and that's when he puts his locker on, because he can't hardly steer the thing when it's locked. So he doesn't put the front locker in until he needs it. It's always locked in the rear, but he doesn't use the front until he needs it. So what happens, he gets himself all bound up, and he's got his little arms in here, and he's trying to turn this thing and rock it, and he knows he's hit that switch and held it for a couple seconds, but he doesn't see that green light. So he keeps stopping and going down there and hitting that button, and it's sending current to that little motor down there. And I've always been worried that him doing that was going to burn that little motor up. So anyway, I finally had some time and figured out how to wire these ECUs and switches up. Another thing that I changed when I did this is I spliced into the factory pigtail that comes off the e-locker. Those are the 2 factory connectors. I cut the harness right here, right before the next connector that goes into the main harness on the rear of I think it was a 4Runner or Tacoma. I can't remember which one this locker came out. I got a bunch of them. But so I soldered the wires, my wires, together here. And by doing that, I've always been worried that, my solder joints are good joints, but they're stiff. The factory wiring are much smaller wires than what I've been using, and I've always just been afraid that with all the bouncing and movement that this axle does, that these right outside where it was soldered, would keep bending back and forth and break. Never had any problem, but like I said, I think it's better off since I've got the ECUs, figure them out, get them working, and that way you can just like the factory, all you got to do is just touch the button, and the ECU does the rest. So I'll take you over here and show you what I did. All right, so this is my little homemade switch panel. That's the locker in the background, and it's locked right now. This little red light this would be the same as your dash light on the Tacoma or 4Runner, that one that blinks on the dash and says rear lock or whatever it says. So that's locked, and you can see in the background, you can see the locker working. All right, so that's unlocked. Light is off. When this is wired in your truck, your 4Runner or your Tacoma or whatever it's in, when you hit that button and those splines aren't lined up, this little light will blink until you turn the wheels or whatever you do to line those splines up, and it'll kick it the rest of the way over. Let me see if I can make it do it. Unlocked. I'll spin the splines here in the diff a little bit. kind of tricky to get it caught just right. All right, there you go. All right, so now the ECU has tried to lock the differential, but the splines inside are not lined up. So the motor in here has spun all the way, and now the shifting fork is under tension in here, and as soon as you turn or rock the truck and these splines line up on both sides, it'll kick this the rest of the way over, but the motor's already run as far as it would run. That's what I was talking about over there, that you can't send any more current to that motor. Button's in, and there's no way you can send more current to that motor. It's already done what it's going to do until you unlock it. I don't know if I can make it. There you go. So now we just turned the wheels, locked all the way, went to red. The way I have it wired up, I have my little switch, so it's lit all the time. I don't know if you can tell, but some of these switches don't have, I think some of them have 3 wires coming out of the back. Mine has, it's either 4, mine has 4 wires. So I have the ability, all the switches I have the wires to make it light up when you turn on your lights, but I just have all the power for the lights on here running to constant. When I have power on in that truck, it's always lit, because I don't have running lights and all that stuff. It's just an off-road truck. But anyway, okay. So another thing, right now on here, this is a ECU out of a 4Runner, I think. This one's out of a Tacoma. They both work. This switch, I think, is out of a Tacoma, so I'm using a Tacoma switch. 4Runner ECU, I can swap them all around, and they all work. So at least in the earlier versions, it doesn't matter as long as your pinouts are the same. Let me see if I can get my little, and this is my little diagram that I made for myself, so that whenever fooled with this thing again, I would be able to know what I did here. And I will post a link to this, but none of these colors that I have in here really matter, because they're just the colors of the wire I used. I used one cable that has 7 separate wires in it, and that would be 5 for this connector and 2 for this connector, and these are the connectors that are on, these are the female connectors that connect straight to the differential. I didn't use the pigtail. There's your factory pigtail. I didn't use that. I used one wire all the way to differential. I bought on Amazon a package of like 5 of these, which is the connector here. It comes with all the little doodads you use to wire it up. It was like, I don't know, like $10 for 5 of them. I pulled this connector off another wire in a harness I had, but I put the part numbers. Those are the Toyota part numbers for those 2 connectors. You can order those, or if you wanted to use your harness, you just trace the wires from here on back to here and make your harness. Then you would need the female end of here, but it's the same wires, except for I'm running 7 wires because there's a ground for each side, and then the factory harness, that ground splices inside this harness and becomes 1 ground here. So if you were using this end of the factory harness, all you would need was 6 wires. And another thing is, when I was wiring this, it took me a while to get this whole light thing figured out. I could get this to go solid red, but I couldn't get to blink. And I messed around with a bunch, and finally I went to another e-locker I had and just pulled the switch part out of the diff right here and swapped it over, and it worked. So this was bad. And I've read a bunch of different forums, people talking about, some people's lights blink and some of them don't. Well, it's this. If you have a light that doesn't blink when it's trying to lock, it's your switch is bad on your differential. Only other thing I can think is this is a little tool you'd use to put these little watertight connectors together. It's like, I got it on Amazon for, I don't know, 15 bucks or something. But anything else? I ran one cable. It's a 7-wire cable. Cut the insulation off here, split it into my 2 separate sections of wire, and then separately put insulation back on them, shrink wrap. So I don't have any splices until I get to my ECU. And the only reason I have splices there is because the hole that I'm running all this through on the firewall in the truck wasn't big enough to get my connectors through. So I had to have splices somewhere to get my wiring through. No big deal. But, you know, if you were putting it on a truck where you didn't have to pull it in and out and weren't worried about breaking diffs and stuff, then, you know, you could just run your wire all the way here to your ECU, and you could buy the pinouts that go in there and wire it or however you want to do it. But anyway, this is all all the E-lockers I have, ECUs and switches are all from like first gen Tacomas and the third gen 4Runner Limited. So they're all, you know, they're all the 8-inch 8-inch E-lockers and the older ECUs. Like I said, this little diagram, if you get to fooling around, if you're going to use it, don't worry about my wire colors. It's all the pinouts. Oh, and the other thing, my diagram is all from the back side of the connector. Let me find a connector here. Okay, so my diagram, all my pinouts are labeled from the back side of the connector, and I kind of drew the way the connector looks. So that's the connecting side. Flip it over. My diagram is from the back side of it. So that's your pinouts, and it's the same on all my pinouts here. This is all from the back side of the pinout. Can't think of anything else I forgot. Good luck, and I hope it helped you. Thanks for watching.